Archangel Michael is standing between you and financial defeat. Claim this now, not as a promise that money will simply appear without effort, but as an invitation to finally stop fighting this particular battle alone, exhausted, and without the clarity that genuine support and honest strategy can actually provide. Stay with this message a little longer than you might normally give to something like this. Financial struggle has a way of making a person feel isolated, as though this particular difficulty is uniquely theirs to bear, uniquely embarrassing, uniquely evidence of some personal failing rather than simply one of the most common, universal struggles nearly every person eventually faces at some point throughout their life. Breathe slowly. Let your shoulders soften. Whatever financial anxiety has been sitting with you recently, set it down for these next few minutes, not because it does not matter, but because clarity requires stillness first, and constant anxiety has likely been stealing exactly the kind of stillness that would actually help you think clearly about your particular situation. Here is what standing between you and defeat actually means, described honestly rather than left in vague, mysterious language that generates emotion without offering genuine understanding. It means that financial defeat, genuine, permanent defeat, is far less inevitable than prolonged financial struggle often makes it feel. It means that the specific patterns keeping you stuck are almost always addressable, even when they currently feel overwhelming or permanent. It means that you possess more genuine capacity to change your particular situation than chronic financial anxiety typically allows you to recognize or access. This message exists to help you access that capacity more fully, offering honest reflection rather than empty encouragement, practical clarity rather than vague spiritual promises disconnected from the actual, concrete steps genuine financial improvement typically requires. Reflect honestly on what specifically has been feeling most defeating about your current financial situation. Perhaps a specific debt that feels overwhelming, growing rather than shrinking despite your ongoing efforts to address it. Perhaps a persistent gap between income and expenses that never seems to close no matter how carefully you try to manage your spending. Perhaps a general sense of financial chaos, an inability to gain clear, accurate visibility into your actual numbers, leaving you managing from anxiety and guesswork rather than from genuine clarity and informed decision-making. Perhaps simply exhaustion, having tried repeatedly to improve your situation without the sustained success you had genuinely hoped for. Give yourself genuine time with this reflection rather than settling immediately for whatever answer first comes to mind. Financial struggle often involves multiple interconnected difficulties simultaneously, and identifying which specific aspect currently feels most significant can help focus your energy more effectively than attempting to address everything at once in ways that often prove overwhelming and ultimately less productive than more focused, sequential engagement with your particular challenges. Whatever specific form your financial struggle currently takes, hold it clearly in mind as you continue through this reflection, because everything that follows is meant to address exactly this kind of specific, lived difficulty rather than remaining abstract encouragement disconnected from your actual circumstances. Here is something worth understanding about why financial struggle so often feels like more than simply a practical problem, carrying instead a weight that touches identity, self-worth, and overall well-being far beyond what the actual numbers alone would seem to justify. Money, in most cultures, has become deeply entangled with worth and capability, meaning that financial struggle frequently generates shame alongside practical difficulty, shame that then makes the practical difficulty significantly harder to address honestly, since shame tends to produce avoidance rather than the clear-eyed engagement genuine financial improvement actually requires. Notice how differently financial struggle often feels compared to other, equally common practical difficulties, a broken appliance, a scheduling conflict, a minor health issue. These other difficulties, while genuinely inconvenient, rarely carry the same weight of shame and self-judgment that financial struggle so consistently generates. This difference reveals something important, that much of the emotional burden accompanying financial difficulty stems not from the practical difficulty itself, but from the cultural meaning attached to money and financial capability, meaning that can be examined and, to a meaningful degree, released even while the practical work of financial improvement continues. Consider whether shame has been operating alongside your practical financial difficulty, a quiet sense that your struggle reflects some personal failing or inadequacy, rather than simply reflecting circumstances, decisions made with the information and resources available at the time, and patterns that, while genuinely limiting, remain entirely addressable rather than permanent verdicts on your fundamental worth or capability. Releasing this shame, even partially, tends to make genuine financial improvement significantly more accessible, since shame-driven avoidance typically prevents exactly the honest engagement with your actual numbers and actual patterns that meaningful improvement genuinely requires. Here is something worth understanding about the specific patterns that most commonly keep people financially stuck, patterns worth examining honestly against your own particular situation rather than assuming your struggle is entirely unique or without recognizable, addressable structure. Many people struggle financially not primarily because of insufficient income, though income genuinely matters, but because of an unclear or inconsistent relationship with their actual financial reality, avoiding regular, honest examination of their actual numbers because that examination feels uncomfortable or overwhelming. Consider a simple analogy that illustrates this pattern clearly. A person who never steps on a scale, avoiding it specifically because they fear what it might reveal, cannot make informed decisions about their health, regardless of how much they genuinely care about improving it. The avoidance itself, rather than any particular number the scale might reveal, becomes the primary obstacle to genuine progress. Financial avoidance operates in remarkably similar fashion, the discomfort of avoiding honest examination ultimately proving more costly than whatever discomfort that honest examination itself would have actually produced. This avoidance, understandable as it is, tends to allow small problems to grow into larger ones, simply because they remain unaddressed until they become too significant to continue ignoring. Reflect honestly on whether this pattern applies to your own situation, whether you maintain clear, regular, honest visibility into your actual income, expenses, debts, and savings, or whether this visibility has been avoided, leaving you managing primarily through anxious guesswork rather than clear, accurate information. If this avoidance pattern applies to your situation, the first genuine step towards standing successfully against financial defeat involves simply gaining honest, accurate visibility into your actual numbers, not to judge yourself harshly based on what you discover, but simply to finally know clearly what you are actually working with, replacing anxious uncertainty with concrete, workable information. Here is another common pattern worth examining honestly: the specific role that scarcity thinking plays in financial decision-making, often operating quite differently from careful, deliberate financial management despite sometimes appearing similar from the outside. Scarcity thinking operates from persistent fear, making financial decisions reactively, based on immediate anxiety rather than clear, considered strategy. This can look like avoiding financial planning entirely because it feels too frightening to engage with directly. It can look like impulsive spending driven by momentary desire to escape persistent financial anxiety, even when that spending ultimately worsens the underlying financial situation. It can look like excessive, anxious hoarding that provides little genuine security while generating ongoing stress about whether even significant savings will ever feel sufficient. Notice the specific difference between a decision made from careful consideration of your actual circumstances and options, compared to a decision made primarily to escape uncomfortable feelings in the moment they arise. The first tends to produce outcomes genuinely aligned with your actual, longer-term goals and interests. The second tends to produce short-term relief followed by longer-term consequences that often worsen the very anxiety that decision was originally intended to escape or avoid in the first place. Reflect on whether scarcity thinking, distinct from careful, deliberate financial management, has been operating in your own particular financial decisions recently. This distinction matters significantly, because addressing scarcity thinking requires different strategies than simply improving practical financial skills alone, often requiring genuine attention to the underlying fear and anxiety driving these particular patterns. Rather than assuming purely practical financial education alone will resolve difficulties rooted primarily in unaddressed emotional and psychological patterns. Here is something worth understanding about the specific relationship between financial struggle and isolation, since prolonged financial difficulty often leads people to withdraw from open, honest conversation about money, whether due to shame, fear of judgment, or simple discomfort with a topic that carries such significant emotional weight in most cultures and social contexts. This isolation, while understandable, tends to worsen financial struggle rather than improve it, since isolated struggle typically lacks the perspective, support, and practical resources that open engagement with trusted others could otherwise provide. Think about how differently most people approach other significant life challenges, health difficulties, relationship struggles, career uncertainty, typically seeking at least some degree of support and perspective from trusted people in their lives. Financial struggle, uniquely among major life challenges, often gets carried in almost complete silence, a pattern that deserves examination rather than simple acceptance as inevitable or unchangeable, given how significantly this particular isolation likely worsens the actual difficulty being experienced. Consider whether isolation has characterized your own relationship with your financial struggle, whether you have been carrying this particular difficulty largely alone, without genuine, honest conversation with anyone who might offer meaningful support or perspective. If isolation has indeed characterized your experience, consider what it might mean to begin breaking that isolation, even in small ways, sharing at least part of your genuine financial situation with someone you trust, someone capable of offering support rather than judgment. Here is something worth understanding about what genuinely standing against financial defeat actually requires in practical terms, rather than remaining abstract spiritual language disconnected from concrete, actionable steps. It typically requires, first, honest, complete visibility into your actual financial numbers, income, expenses, debts, and savings, gathered without judgment simply as accurate information to work with going forward. It typically requires, second, a realistic plan based on that honest information, addressing your specific situation rather than generic financial advice that may not actually fit your particular circumstances. It typically requires, third, consistent, sustained follow-through on that plan, adjusted as needed over time rather than abandoned at the first sign of difficulty or slower than hoped progress. Think about each of these three elements as building upon one another sequentially, rather than as entirely separate, unrelated tasks. Honest visibility provides the accurate foundation without which any subsequent planning remains built on guesswork rather than genuine understanding. Realistic planning translates that honest visibility into an actionable path forward, specific enough to actually guide daily decisions rather than remaining a vague, general intention. Consistent follow-through, sustained over the timeline your particular situation genuinely requires, is what ultimately transforms planning into actual, measurable improvement in your real financial circumstances. Consider which of these three elements, honest visibility, realistic planning, or consistent follow-through, feels most currently lacking in your own particular financial situation. This honest assessment can help you identify where your own particular efforts might be most valuably focused, rather than attempting to address everything simultaneously in ways that often prove overwhelming and ultimately unsustainable. Here is something worth understanding about seeking appropriate support as part of genuinely standing against financial defeat, since attempting significant financial improvement entirely alone, without any external support or resources, often proves considerably more difficult than necessary. If your specific financial situation involves complexity beyond what you feel confident managing independently, whether significant debt, complicated tax situations, or other genuinely complex financial matters, consider whether professional financial guidance might offer valuable support, not as a sign of failure or inadequacy, but simply as wise, appropriate use of available expertise and resources. Think about how readily most people accept professional support for other significant, complex matters, consulting doctors for health concerns, lawyers for legal matters, mechanics for vehicle repairs, without any particular sense of shame or failure attached to seeking that expertise. Financial matters deserve this same straightforward, practical approach, seeking appropriate professional guidance when your particular situation genuinely warrants it, rather than assuming complete independent self-sufficiency represents the only acceptable or admirable approach to genuine financial improvement. Consider, too, whether free or low-cost financial counseling resources exist in your particular community or region, resources specifically designed to help people navigate exactly the kind of financial difficulty this message has been addressing throughout its content. Many communities offer resources of this kind, often underutilized simply because people struggling financially frequently do not realize these resources exist or feel too ashamed to seek them out even when they are genuinely aware of their availability. Here is something worth understanding about the specific timeline you might reasonably expect for genuine financial improvement, since unrealistic expectations regarding how quickly significant financial change typically occurs often lead to premature discouragement and abandonment of otherwise sound financial strategies. Genuine financial improvement, particularly for situations involving significant debt or persistently insufficient income relative to expenses, typically unfolds gradually over months or even years, rather than resolving completely within a few weeks despite even genuinely committed, consistent effort. Consider how this same principle applies readily to other significant, worthwhile goals throughout life: physical fitness, professional skill development, meaningful relationship building, none of which typically resolve completely within a few weeks regardless of genuine commitment and effort. Financial improvement deserves this same realistic patience, celebrating genuine, gradual progress rather than expecting the kind of instant, complete transformation that few genuinely significant, worthwhile goals actually allow, regardless of how much genuine effort and commitment a person brings toward achieving them. This does not mean immediate action does not matter, or that meaningful progress cannot begin right away. It simply means holding realistic expectations about the actual timeline involved, celebrating genuine, incremental progress along the way rather than expecting complete transformation within an unreasonably compressed timeframe that most genuine financial improvement processes simply do not follow, regardless of how committed and consistent your ongoing effort genuinely proves to be. Here is something worth understanding about the specific emotional experience that often accompanies genuine engagement with financial difficulty, since this engagement typically produces discomfort before it produces relief, a pattern worth anticipating rather than being caught off guard by when it inevitably occurs. Looking honestly at difficult financial numbers, however necessary that honest examination genuinely is, typically generates discomfort in the moment, even though this discomfort ultimately proves considerably less costly than continued avoidance over an extended period. Picture the specific difference between the sharp, immediate discomfort of finally opening a bill or statement you have been avoiding, compared to the dull, ongoing anxiety of continuing to avoid it entirely. The sharp discomfort, while genuinely uncomfortable in the moment, tends to resolve relatively quickly once the actual information is known and can be worked with directly. The dull, ongoing anxiety of continued avoidance tends to persist indefinitely, often growing worse over time as the underlying situation continues developing without your active, informed engagement and management. Prepare yourself for this initial discomfort as you begin whatever specific steps toward greater financial clarity and improvement feel most relevant to your own particular situation. This discomfort does not indicate you are doing something wrong. It typically indicates you are doing something genuinely necessary, engaging honestly with difficult material that avoidance has been protecting you from directly facing, even though that protection has ultimately allowed the underlying difficulty to persist and often worsen over time. Here is something worth understanding about celebrating genuine progress along this particular journey, since financial improvement, like most significant, sustained change, benefits considerably from genuine acknowledgement of incremental progress rather than exclusively focusing on the more distant, complete resolution that remains the ultimate goal. Small victories deserve genuine recognition: a debt slightly reduced, a month where spending stayed within your planned budget, a difficult financial conversation finally had rather than continuing to be avoided. Consider how genuine acknowledgement of small progress differs from simply thinking briefly about it before immediately moving on to focus exclusively on what remains unaccomplished. Genuine acknowledgement involves actually pausing, however briefly, to register the accomplishment fully, allowing yourself to feel whatever satisfaction or relief that progress genuinely produces, rather than rushing immediately past it toward the next challenge without ever fully registering what has already been achieved through your continued, genuine effort. Consider what specific small victories might already exist within your recent financial efforts, even if your overall situation remains genuinely challenging and unresolved. Acknowledging these small victories, rather than dismissing them as insufficient compared to your larger, more distant goals, tends to sustain motivation considerably more effectively than exclusively focusing on how much remains yet to be accomplished before genuine, complete resolution finally arrives. Here is something worth understanding about the specific role that comparison plays in financial struggle, since measuring your own particular situation against other people's apparent financial circumstances, especially the curated, incomplete picture most people present publicly, tends to generate unnecessary additional distress without providing any genuinely useful information about your own actual progress or circumstances. Consider releasing this comparison as consistently as you genuinely can, redirecting your attention instead toward your own specific progress, measured honestly against your own particular starting point and circumstances, rather than against an incomplete, filtered picture of someone else's financial situation that likely bears little genuine resemblance to the complete reality of their own particular circumstances and struggles. Here is something worth understanding about what genuinely changes once financial struggle begins meaningfully improving, benefits that extend considerably beyond simply the specific financial numbers themselves. Reduced financial anxiety typically improves sleep, reduces overall stress, strengthens relationships that financial tension may have previously strained, and frees up significant mental and emotional energy that chronic financial anxiety has likely been consuming for far longer than you may have fully recognized until beginning this particular process of honest reflection and engagement. Consider what specific areas of your life beyond finances themselves might genuinely benefit from reduced financial stress, offering additional motivation for the sometimes difficult, sustained work that genuine financial improvement typically requires over an extended period of consistent, honest engagement. Consider the specific relationship between money and identity that may have developed over your lifetime, often beginning in childhood through messages absorbed long before you were old enough to consciously evaluate their accuracy or usefulness. Perhaps you absorbed a belief that financial struggle simply runs in your family, an inevitable inheritance rather than a pattern that remains entirely capable of being interrupted through your own conscious choices and efforts. Perhaps you absorbed a belief that wanting financial security beyond simple survival reflects greed or excessive materialism, a belief that can quietly sabotage genuine efforts toward reasonable, healthy financial stability. Reflect honestly on what specific beliefs about money and financial capability you absorbed during childhood, examining whether these particular beliefs continue serving you accurately now, as an adult with your own particular circumstances and capabilities, or whether they persist simply through familiarity and repetition, deserving genuine reconsideration rather than continued unconscious acceptance without examination. Examine, too, the specific role that financial trauma from past experiences might be playing in your current relationship with money, since specific difficult financial experiences, whether a significant loss, a period of genuine scarcity, or a specific instance of financial betrayal or mismanagement by someone you trusted, often leave lasting impact that continues shaping current financial decisions and anxiety levels long after the original circumstances have passed. If a specific past experience feels connected to your current financial anxiety, this connection deserves honest acknowledgement, potentially benefiting from the same kind of processing and healing that other forms of emotional trauma typically require in order to genuinely resolve rather than continuing to operate unconsciously in the background of your ongoing financial decisions and emotional responses. Consider what specific role your current environment plays in supporting or undermining your financial goals, since environment shapes behavior considerably more than most people initially recognize. If your current social circle normalizes financial patterns that conflict with your own genuine goals, whether excessive spending, avoidance of financial planning, or persistent complaint without corresponding action toward improvement, this environmental influence deserves honest consideration as you continue developing your own particular approach toward genuine financial improvement. Reflect on what specific systems you might build to support consistent financial behavior, rather than relying purely on willpower and motivation alone, resources that reliably fluctuate over time regardless of how genuinely committed you currently feel to your particular financial goals. Automated savings transfers, for example, require considerably less ongoing willpower than manually deciding to save each month, since the decision only needs to be made once during initial setup, rather than repeatedly, indefinitely, every single time that decision would otherwise need to be actively made and maintained. Consider, as well, what specific role gratitude might play in your ongoing financial journey, not toxic positivity that denies genuine difficulty, but honest appreciation for whatever resources currently exist alongside continued, genuine effort toward improvement. This gratitude does not require pretending your financial situation is already resolved or that genuine difficulty does not exist. It simply involves occasionally, deliberately noticing what your current resources do allow, however modest, alongside your continued awareness of what you are still working diligently to build and improve over time. Here is a final significant consideration before this message moves toward its close. Financial defeat, in the sense of genuinely permanent, unaddressable struggle, is far less inevitable than prolonged difficulty often makes it feel from within that difficulty's persistent, exhausting grip. Your particular situation, however challenging it currently feels, remains genuinely addressable through honest engagement, realistic planning, appropriate support, and sustained, consistent follow-through over whatever timeline your particular circumstances genuinely require. Release whatever shame has accumulated regarding your current financial situation. Shame does not accelerate genuine improvement. It simply adds unnecessary additional weight on top of already difficult circumstances, weight that typically makes honest engagement significantly harder to access rather than easier. Approach your particular situation instead with genuine self-compassion, recognizing that financial struggle reflects circumstances and patterns rather than fundamental personal failure, alongside genuine commitment to beginning, or continuing, the honest, practical work that genuine financial improvement actually requires. Before this message reaches its true close, take one final moment for yourself, genuinely absorbing what has emerged throughout this reflection rather than rushing immediately toward whatever comes next in your day. Name, specifically, one piece of your financial situation you have been avoiding examining honestly. Name, specifically, one small, concrete step you might take within the next few days toward finally gaining honest, accurate clarity regarding that particular piece of your overall financial picture. This does not need to feel dramatic or overwhelming in order to matter significantly. It simply needs to feel genuine, honest engagement rather than another moment of temporary reflection quickly forgotten once this message ends and your attention naturally returns to whatever else occupies your ordinary day. Trust that genuine improvement remains available to you, even amid whatever genuine difficulty currently exists within your particular financial circumstances. This message is not promising instant, effortless transformation. It is offering honest encouragement toward the practical, sustained engagement that genuine financial improvement actually requires, alongside genuine reassurance that this particular struggle, however isolating and overwhelming it may currently feel, remains addressable rather than permanent, workable rather than hopeless. Consider, too, what specific record you might keep as you continue this process beyond today, tracking your actual numbers regularly rather than relying purely on anxious impression or memory. This kind of concrete tracking, maintained consistently over time, tends to replace vague, anxious uncertainty with clear, workable information, itself often providing meaningful relief simply through the clarity it provides, regardless of exactly how favorable or unfavorable that clarity initially reveals your particular numbers to actually be. Reflect, as well, on what specific obstacles are most likely to arise as you continue this particular process beyond today, obstacles worth anticipating now rather than being caught entirely unprepared when they eventually arise. Perhaps discouragement when progress feels slower than initially hoped. Perhaps old patterns of avoidance attempting to reassert themselves, particularly once the initial motivation from this specific reflection begins to naturally fade. Perhaps unexpected expenses or setbacks that test your continued commitment to whatever specific financial plan you have begun developing and implementing. Whatever specific obstacle feels most likely for your own particular situation, briefly considering in advance how you might respond to it can help you navigate it more effectively when it actually arises, rather than being caught entirely unprepared by a difficulty you had not previously anticipated or considered throughout your ongoing planning process. Consider what specific support might genuinely help sustain your continued engagement beyond today, whether through a trusted person who can offer encouragement and accountability, a professional resource appropriate to your particular circumstances, or simply a consistent personal practice of regular, honest financial review that helps maintain the clarity and motivation this initial reflection has hopefully helped you access and begin cultivating. There is one more layer worth adding before this message truly comes to its close, something practical that helps ensure this reflection actually translates into sustained, meaningful engagement over the coming weeks and months, rather than remaining simply another moment of temporary motivation quickly forgotten once ordinary daily demands reassert their usual claim on your attention. Consider what specific weekly practice might help you maintain honest, ongoing engagement with your financial situation, something brief and sustainable rather than elaborate and likely to be abandoned once initial motivation naturally diminishes over time. Perhaps a specific day each week dedicated to reviewing your actual numbers, tracking progress, and adjusting your approach as needed based on what that regular review reveals. This kind of consistent, regular engagement tends to build genuine financial confidence far more effectively than sporadic, intense bursts of attention followed by extended periods of renewed avoidance. Reflect on what specific milestones might help you track meaningful progress over the coming months, milestones specific enough to provide genuine, concrete evidence of movement, rather than vague, general hopes that remain difficult to measure or genuinely assess. A specific debt reduced by a specific amount. A specific emergency fund reaching a specific milestone. A specific number of consecutive months staying within your planned budget. These concrete markers provide tangible evidence of progress that can sustain motivation considerably more effectively than purely abstract hopes for eventual, undefined improvement. Consider, too, what specific role continued education might play in your ongoing financial journey, since financial literacy, like most valuable skills, typically improves through continued learning and practice rather than remaining static from wherever your current level of understanding currently stands. This does not require extensive formal education. It might simply mean reading one book about personal finance relevant to your particular situation, following reputable financial education resources, or seeking out community-based financial literacy programs that many regions offer, often at low or no cost to participants. Examine what specific conversations about money you might need to have with people close to you as this process continues unfolding, whether a partner requiring alignment regarding shared financial goals and approaches, family members whose expectations or patterns may be influencing your own financial decisions, or friends whose social activities may be creating financial pressure that conflicts with your own particular goals and current circumstances. These conversations, while sometimes genuinely difficult, often prove considerably less difficult in actual practice than the anticipatory anxiety beforehand typically suggests they will be. Consider what specific role professional development or income growth might play alongside expense management in your overall financial strategy, since many financial improvement approaches focus primarily on reducing expenses while overlooking the equally valuable, and sometimes more impactful, strategy of increasing income through skill development, career advancement, or additional income streams appropriate to your particular circumstances and available time and energy. Both approaches, expense management and income growth, typically work most effectively when pursued together rather than relying exclusively on one approach alone. Reflect, too, on what specific self-talk patterns you want to consciously cultivate as you continue this particular journey, replacing whatever harsh, discouraging internal narrative may have previously accompanied your financial struggles with language that acknowledges genuine difficulty while also supporting continued, genuine effort and self-compassion throughout the process. The specific words you use internally, repeated consistently over time, genuinely shape both your emotional experience and your practical behavior regarding your ongoing financial situation and efforts toward improvement. Consider what it would mean to view this particular financial journey as an ongoing practice rather than a problem requiring one-time, complete resolution after which the matter becomes permanently settled and requires no further attention. Financial well-being, like physical health or any other significant, ongoing area of life, typically requires continued, sustained attention and adjustment over time, rather than a single, complete solution that, once achieved, eliminates the need for any further engagement or ongoing awareness regarding your particular financial circumstances and evolving goals. This message reached you today for a reason. Trust that. Carry it with you. And when you are ready, not before, not because anyone told you to, but when you are genuinely ready, take your next step. Deep down, you already know what that step is. Thank you for receiving this message today. Be gentle with yourself as you continue standing against whatever financial difficulty currently exists in your life, one honest, deliberate step at a time.